Not a matter of if, but when crisis will rock your world. I'm Roshini Rajkumar, crisis strategist, licensed attorney, and host of The Crisis Files. In each case file, we cover ripped from the headline crises. Today is pretty personal. Once again, my hometown of Minneapolis is an epicenter of crisis. A grouping of events that happened in January 2026 that in the past might occur over years. Whenever things are unsettled, the lawyer in me likes to turn to one place for some clarity: the law. To dive into the law, I turn to retired federal judge Jim Rosenbaum. Still active as a mediator and arbitrator, Judge Rosenbaum served on Minnesota's federal district court bench for 25 years, and 4 years prior to that as U.S. Attorney. Judge Rosenbaum is here for the case file I call Judging ICE. Good afternoon, Judge. As we talk here in early February, the Secretary of Homeland Security just announced all ICE officers in Minneapolis will get body cameras. Communities around Minnesota are mourning the deaths of 2 American citizens shot during protests against ICE activities. Judge, lines have really been drawn between federal and state laws. Sanctuary cities and immigration enforcement. Just some of the terms that everybody's using and getting to know. Where do we even begin with this, Judge?
We begin with the fact that in a complex society, there are people who have varying, differing, and strongly held views. We have a very large community, not just in Minnesota, certainly, but nationally, of people who have entered the United States without license, without permission. Whether you wish to call them undocumented or whether you want to call them illegal, they came in and they have not been granted rights to be in the United States. They may be entitled to some if they have applied. Those are the people who may or may not qualify for amnesty. And then we have a group of people who would like very much to make them depart. And there is a strongly held group or belief among a group of people that some should not be here at all. There are clearly a fair number of people who have either been convicted of crimes in the United States or been convicted or charged with crimes outside of the United States. And then there's a group of people, American citizens, who welcome immigrants from wherever they are from. So we're looking at all kinds of conflicted views between the state and the federal and individual citizens, and that really leads to a witch's brew of problems.
And to be very, very just exclamation on the point, the United States of America is a melting pot. Immigrants are welcome in this country. I myself am an immigrant. I want to point out, and this is why I always find some sort of clarity and hopefully calm in the law. If someone comes here and they're doing it legally, no matter what their status, refugee status, green card, work permit, whatever it is, they should be entitled to that legal status. The rougher, tougher area that we're really seeing examples of, especially in Minneapolis, but in some other parts of the country, are when someone isn't legal, they don't have a protected legal status of some kind, and they stay. And then the second layer of this, Judge, is how they're treated if they choose to stay without permission. And that is really a big reason why I wanted you on the Crisis Files, because when it comes to the law, we've got the federal law, we have state law, we have a lot of amendments when we think of the Constitution of the United States. The First Amendment, freedom of assembly, freedom of press, freedom of speech. The Second Amendment, the right to bear arms. The Fourth Amendment, due process. And the Sixth Amendment, the right to counsel, to having a lawyer to represent you. Give us a little bit of legal history and education on how all of these amendments should work in a perfect world.
If only we had a perfect world, but let me try and give you a bit of a description. The First Amendment protects the right to peaceably assemble and to peaceably petition the government. And petitioning the government doesn't mean you have to write a letter. You can stand there and tell the government, I don't care for what you're doing, and I don't want you to do it. And that's all permitted under the First Amendment. Under the Second Amendment, obviously, that is the right to keep and bear arms. And every state in a certain amount does some regulation, but nationally and across the country, you are entitled to be armed, to have a firearm in your possession. Differing states, whether it can be visible, whether it has to be hidden, or how it has to be carried, are regulated separately to some extent. If you are a person in this country, and it's interesting because it says person and not citizen, the Fourth Amendment protects you from government, from precipitous government action. You are entitled to be protected in your property, in your personal belongings, and in your personal location, unless there is a warrant. And here the interesting issues are all over the place right now about whether the warrant is a judicial warrant or an administrative warrant.
What
But
are the differences there, Judge?
a judicial warrant is a warrant where an officer swears to a judge to a certain set of information that says there is probable cause that I can either arrest this person or obtain information, evidence from that place. And a judge judges that decision and decides whether to grant or deny that warrant. An administrative warrant is simply a warrant signed by somebody, not an appointed federal judge, and that person says you're entitled to certain documents. You may be entitled to kind of history records, business records, and those kinds of inquiries. But there is an argument being made right now that you do not need a judicial warrant to arrest somebody who is here illegally or who you know to be illegally located in the country, in the state. That is an open question, but very, very strong evidence in judicial decisions suggesting that that is not a correct interpretation of the law.
Okay, so this is really an important point because that's what a lot of the problems, at least in Minneapolis, and I'm for now going to focus on Minneapolis because this is the hotbed that's happening, and I'm hoping and praying it dissipates, and is that some of the federal agents, let's call them ICE officers, just to use a term that we're using. Okay. They may have an administrative warrant, is that what you're saying, instead of a judicial warrant? Or they may have nothing and they are arresting people. Is that one of the scenarios that's playing out?
They are not only arresting people, but they're also entering into their homes or into the secured areas. And those are the closed off areas of businesses. And those are not permitted, at least in my opinion, absent a judicial warrant sworn out before a judge and a judge adjudicating whether or not they believe that there is sufficient evidence, probable cause, if you will, to allow that to be effectuated.
Judge, and your opinion matters. You kind of have the heightened opinion because for 25 years you were on the bench, you're interpreting laws, you're sending down rulings. Is there ever a time when a federal agent could enter a home without that judicial warrant? Is there a danger?
But the answer is yes, but that's for exigent purposes. As a convenient example, a fireman is entitled to come into your home if they suspect that there's a fire in there because there's simply no opportunity to obtain a warrant. There are also situations where somebody may have drugs and there's a belief that they may flush them down a toilet. And before you can get to a judge, now those are called exigent circumstances. We're not talking about that here. We're talking about people who are in the United States, have been here in many cases for years, and you know where they live, you know where their house is, you know where their spouse is, you know where their children are. Uh, that is not an exigent circumstance.
And two scenarios there. So you might know where their house is, where their spouse is. They could be legal, they might not be legal. But in either situation, a federal agent cannot enter their home without that judicial warrant. At least that is what the law is saying.
That is my belief as to what the law is. There is, as I have indicated, particularly among the I.C.E. and I.C.E. administration at this time, that an administrative warrant, we know that the person's here, we know that the person has been convicted of a crime, we know that the person had a criminal history before he got here, those kinds of things, and therefore we are entitled to come in. That has never been the ruling by a court.
And how do you see that playing out over the next few weeks to months?
In this country, almost every complex issue plays itself out eventually in a courtroom on either appeal or up to the United States Supreme Court. And this is a very likely issue to be litigated with a great deal of care because the questions are profound.
And might even end up in front of the U.S. Supreme Court one day.
It's conceivable. It would
Right.
not surprise me. The Supreme Court has never directly spoken on this subject.
Right.
It has suggested it. It's a strongly held belief, but the answer is there's not a case that I can cite.
Okay. So I wanted Judge Rosenbaum to join us on this episode of the Crisis Files because I wanted him to lay out the law, and through some of my questions, my understanding of the law, I think I'm in a good position to ask you the questions, but you really know the law and you've interpreted it for decades. And even now as a mediator and arbitrator, you're still using the law as a backdrop for what you're doing.
I appreciate the fact that you think that I know something. Don't check with my wife.
Who, by the way, is also a retired judge. But at the end of the day, we are here because we have a crisis in Minneapolis, in the state of Minnesota, especially the city proper and some of the surrounding areas. I would like to think.
There's also another issue that lays itself out in this area. Minnesota and various of the cities have declared themselves refugee communities or
sanctuary cities.
Sanctuary cities. And here again, we have a classic conflict. The state of Minnesota is not in charge of immigration. The United States of America and the Congress is where the actual power to define immigration status is situated. That is not a state option. But the states have said, we are a sanctuary community. We will protect you here, and you are entitled to protection. We will provide that to you. And that's another classic conflict because you have the state saying one thing and you have the federal government saying the other. The federal government has a particular supremacy under the Constitution. At a certain point, the federal law is a dominant over the state law if there are conflicts. And this is a straight up conflict.
And some people have heard the term supremacy clause, and it is something that is as old as the Constitution, has been interpreted many ways over the years, not in really many ways. It's been interpreted in one way. But when, if ever, does something a state or city does, would that ever override what the federal law says on a topic, Judge?
I believe that the answer to the question is unless there is a particular reason why there's a carve out, the federal law is dominant ultimately. We are a single nation. We are a republic organized under the Constitution, and the Constitution is explicit that there is a supremacy clause, and the supreme body is the United States of America.
Okay. So that is helpful to understand, and I hope everyone watching this, listening to this, will really soak that in. So we can have different sanctuary cities continuing to say we're a sanctuary city, we're not going to comply, we're not going to go with it. But ultimately, and it sometimes means more protests, more violence, sadly, until they stop protesting it or stop defying the federal law, those protests or violence could continue. Am I understanding that correctly?
Well, protest is always permitted. Again, we're back to the Constitution.
Peacefully,
You
peaceably.
you're under the same Constitution, and under the Constitution, you are entitled to dispute the government. You are entitled to petition for redress of grievances. You are entitled to peaceably assemble, but you are not entitled to obstruct the United States in the exercise of its own rights. And this is where you see in the protesters, there are some people, and they are entitled to be there. You can take pictures. You can tell the ICE agents you don't like them. You can tell them that they are infringing on somebody's rights. But the reality is, you cannot stop them. They are entitled to pursue the federal interest, and the federal interest here is in exercising the rights that the United States has under the law. And what they're dealing with here, of course, is people who are in the United States who have not got legitimate status under the federal law.
When you
This
say
gets
dealing
back.
with, there's a couple of things the feds are dealing with. They're dealing with protesters who could be anybody, including illegal or legal immigrants. Then what the other group is the people that the content is about, that the federal agents are trying to either detain or discern where they are, who they are. So that's really a lot of these issues get so mixed up together. And yet we have this situation where 2 U.S. citizens were shot, turned out to die. They're now gone. They have passed. And that has layered in another level of anger and frustration. And of course, it's going to be, a lot of it is going to be directed at the federal government. So let's talk about the federal government. Split into the 3 branches, the one that you have been a part of over the years, the judicial branch. We have the executive branch, the president and the president's team. And then we have the Congress. We have the Senate and the House. What could the Congress do to step in and clarify some of this situation, if anything?
One of the great problems in this country is the Congress has not stood up to fulfill its particular part of the role. The definition of citizenship and immigration is defined under the Constitution as a power of the Congress. Now, the Congress would have to pass a law, and the law would have to be signed by the president, but we have not had a revision of the congressional declarations about immigration since the 1980s and 1990s. And that is a serious problem. As a convenient example, everybody is always a wonderful term, but a very large number of people are concerned about what you would call the dreamers. These are children who came into this country with their parents as young kids who've never been in any other country really other than to be born there. They speak only English. They've never been in the other country from which the family may have come. They've been here for 20 years. They've gone to school. They're working. They're paying taxes. All of these things. There has been many discussions about how to set out perhaps a path to citizenship for them. Well, that's fine, but it's all been discussion.
And the Congress needs to act. I mean,
Congress has to change the law.
Right. And
Congress said that almost without regulation, that if you claim that you have been subject to an abuse or threat in another country, you're entitled to amnesty here. So thousands of people have come, but there's no regulation on how many people can come, where they have to come, how soon they have to apply for amnesty status, and how soon amnesty status can be determined or granted. And these are So you've got a blank check and you have thousands and thousands, literally thousands and thousands of people coming here. And all of these things can be dealt with by legislation, but we don't have any legislation.
Right. So it's interesting that you say the congressional law, the law that the Congress has passed in this area of immigration dates back to the 80s and maybe the early 90s. Well, that lines up to, if we do the math, to a few different presidents that have just kind of also been lined up with Congresses that haven't passed or updated laws. And we are here at the problem that we're in currently, 2026 and beyond, where something that has grown for decades isn't going to snap and change overnight. We can't solve the immigration issue overnight.
We just went through an administration, not this one, the previous one, where thousands of people were coming across the border in an entirely unregulated fashion. We don't know who they were. We don't know where they're from. We don't know how many children they've got. We don't know their history. We don't know who they are. And you cannot have that kind of a situation going on. One of the elements of being a nation is you have a border and you say, this is us and that is them. And if you do not have any definition of people coming across without any regulation whatsoever, you have lost a very important part of your sovereignty.
So, again, none of these things taken alone are really, I mean, because they're not, you can't take them alone. We can't really solve it. It's all of these things together have brewed up into what we're seeing right now. For the immediate judge,
it's what I called it a witch's brew.
A witch's brew. I exactly. I've just fell into your terminology here. In the immediate judge, because we could talk about this for days. What would you, from your position, which I would say is elevated as a judge of all of those decades, understanding the law as a prosecutor, then as a judge, now as a mediator, what are a couple things we could do in the immediate that would at least give some peace to the city of Minneapolis and other cities around the country that might be feeling like a similar Minneapolis thing could happen with them?
I wish I was a tenth as intelligent as it would be necessary to answer that question. I would say that a couple of the things maybe are being done. One of them is that the new ruling that the ICE agents are going to be wearing body cameras. We can get a more precise picture of what in the world they're doing. And it's one thing to have an angry protester telling me what an ICE agent did, or an angry ICE agent telling me how a protester behaved. It's to be nice to have something of a more objective information. I would say that getting clarified, and as soon as possible, getting clarified as to whether or not you need to have a judicial warrant or an administrative warrant before you can. The law uses the term historically break the close, but I mean get across the threshold of a home. That needs to be clarified and needs to be clarified soon. It is a horrible situation. This goes back not even to the Constitution. This goes back to English history, where even the King of England could not cross the home of the lowest peasant. And the reason was they were the sovereigns. Ultimately, the king is the king, but the citizenship, the Constitution is endorsed not by somebody, but we the people. And the people are sovereign in this country. And under those circumstances, to have an opportunity to break in without any other than somebody on your team saying it's okay, I think is a terrible problem.
Judge, I wish we could zip this all up in one episode of the Crisis Files. We'll definitely have to have you back, and hopefully there will be happier times in Minneapolis when we do. I do thank you for your expertise today and helping us to discern. And the main reason I wanted to do this episode is so that we can get more of what the law is, how should we be looking at things and taking them in? How should we proactively and peacefully engage and use our constitutional rights? So I thank you so much for taking the time to do this. You can connect directly with Judge Rosenbaum on LinkedIn at James Rosenbaum. This episode is powered by Northwing Digital. Northwing Digital is driven by a simple mission: help businesses succeed. Guided by core values, trust through transparency, and GSD, get stuff done. Northwing specializes in SEO and paid digital ads that deliver measurable results. From Google search to paid social, strategies that help your business stand out and grow. Make your marketing dollars work harder. Visit northwingdigital.com to get started. Northwing Digital, your partner in growth. Rate, review, and subscribe to The Crisis Files on your platform of choice. Follow us on YouTube and Instagram at The Crisis Files. Visit thecrisisfiles.com for all 4 seasons of the show. I'm Roshini Rajkumar. Join me next time on The Crisis Files.